By the end of this video, you will never feel lonely again if you truly take on what I have to say. I always end my videos with this note. I'm going to share with you: harden not your heart, love and serve each other. My grandma wrote this, so it is such an important note for me to remember that we are not here to feel numb. Our senses are meant to be fully felt, not pushed down, isolated, or labeled as bad or wrong. To disown our own feelings is to disown part of ourselves, as we're going to get into in this video. That is exactly what creates that feeling of loneliness. We're also meant to encourage each other. If you're having a pity party or feeling sorry for yourself, the very best next thing you can do is go and serve somebody else and see how your action puts a smile on their face. You then see how quickly you do not feel lonely. So many rich people talk about it doesn't matter what success they created, it doesn't matter how much money they made or who was around them or who they networked with or who they knew who was famous. It's about the feeling of connection with that person. So if we're pushing away those people who love us in our lives or who have the potential to be close to us, critical thoughts or judgmental opinions are asking for disconnection, and we are asking for loneliness. As they say, resistance is persistence. This is also incredibly linked to our brains and the science that you find the evidence you search for. I have come to say that you become the questions you consider. Confirmation bias is the idea that you tend to seek out the information that you already know or believe to be true. What plays a role in evaluating information consistency with prior knowledge is the posterior medial prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that tends to have that confirmation bias. If you think that you aren't prideful, this video is for you. It took me a long time to realize that I can also be wrong. I am not a good person. I am just a person who often makes mistakes and who doesn't deserve to have all the beauty that she has in her life. But because I have that humility of heart, I keep getting blessed. But even claiming to be humble makes me less so, and I acknowledge that. If you think you aren't prideful, this video is for you. Welcome to the first, last, only, and best day of your life. I'm so glad you're here. If you want to carry on the journey, I would love if you subscribed because we can always encourage one another. I'm going to share a story of my own with you about how very prideful I was due to virtue signaling, thinking I was better than other people, and how scary it is looking back. But first, I really want to share about vibration and frequency that I spoke about in the How to Be Confident video recently. I strongly believe that every feeling we have leads to a need. If we can actually sit with and hold an emotion long enough, it is telling us something, and we are meant to translate that into the communication in the brain to say, I need this. I must either speak up or meet a very physiological need or meet a high desire that's going to help somebody else. But every emotion is here to tell us something that we need to act upon in some way. We are supposed to do something, especially with the negative feelings. They come to rise. And when we meet anxiety, stress, guilt, shame with a welcoming environment, when we say, what are you here to tell me? They slowly do rise. They slowly are able to become desire, will, excitement rather than nervousness. Instead of the victim mindset, things are happening to us, I believe that things are happening for us because I believe in alignment and in our capacity to meet what our environment is asking of us. If we want our intention and intuition to align in integrity and impact to the rest of the world, that is the alignment that I seek and that I also went over in the last video, How to Be Confident. A personal story of when I was stuck in the victim mindset was when I was fighting against the climate crisis. Even the vocabulary of fighting was fraught with resistance. And as I said, resistance is persistence. I thought somewhere in the distant future, this will no longer be a stressor. If I no longer told the tale that I had to fight against the climate crisis, I would find myself less stressed. My calendar was so scheduled that I had absolutely no time to think about what I, Julia, wanted. I was constantly filling the gaps, thinking that I had to earn my place, filling out my resume. I was president of the Eco Society. I really cared about that image. I actually believed that I could influence more people by telling them they had to change their lives and have less children. They need to also give up their weekends. They also need to carry this very big responsibility, this weight that is on my shoulders. All I can do is clamor, protest, yell, creating this wave of anxiety and stress and feelings of powerlessness. Somewhere, someone is going to do something that I can't do right now in order to change things. I am so grateful that back in 2020, I had to stop everything. It gave me a moment to really ask why. And like I said, we become the questions we consider. So when I started asking, why am I fighting against the climate crisis? I started delving into the science and I started realizing exactly this about vibrations and frequencies, and how when I held the discomfort and I asked it why it was there, and I asked myself why I was taking the action of going out and yelling all the time, going out and protesting for I didn't even know what exactly. It allowed me to find the answer that I didn't have to do it that way. Problems can be answered in a myriad of ways, and there's always going to be a more easy way to do something. It turns out that I could change my diet, I could cycle instead of drive, I could take the bus, and all of that could be done in a way that I enjoyed. Sharing the joy of doing something is a much easier way to get someone to want to do something. When you truly start to question your own narrative in your head, is it true? Is that story reality or fantasy? What three thoughts go against what I believe? Then you can begin to widen your belief and loosen your grip on the idea that you are a lonely individual. Thinking that you're lonely is what's isolating you. I thought that I had to do those things in order for life on earth to continue. That was my belief system. And when I started to ask, is that true? Will my children live in a world that is also worthy of living in? Even holding the answer of I don't know was so scary for me at the time. So acknowledge, if you don't have an answer for something, is that scary or is it exciting? Because if you're living in a victim mindset and the answer is I don't know, you're going to be so scared. It's going to produce so many feelings of anxiety and nervousness in you. But nerves and excitement show up the exact same way in the body. You're going to feel your heart beating fast, your palms getting sweaty, and you're fast breathing. And you can think, hey, I'm excited. It makes me excited to think that the future is something unknown. It makes me excited to believe that my children are going to have a different life. Of course they will. My parents had a different life than I did. But it was a very slow transition, and it will be, and that's okay, between survival mode, I have to do something in order for life to persist, versus the abundance of life is already here. Every breath that I take is given to me. Every breath that I take is given to me. There is nothing I need to do for my heart to pump and for the blood in my veins to keep flowing other than nourish myself, drink some water every so often, and keep breathing. Life happens on its own, and you are not an integral piece to it remaining that way. When I started to question the narrative of the science, I realized that there was actually nothing I could truly do by taking it to the government that would create real change, real lasting change. But starting this dialogue was hard because I had such a stressful life. I was constantly trying to meet everybody else's expectations and needs instead of my own. And starting this dialogue looked like I am to blame for the fear I experience. And that was a lot to hold. But what I quickly realized is that if I am to blame, I am also in control. I am in control of the feelings I experience. And this reframe led me to acceptance. I began to feel free. I began to realize that I can feel however I choose to, so long as I take part in an action that is going to make me feel a certain way. And then everything began to shift, as it can for you also. If you're feeling lonely, it's not true. And this is how alignment plays a part as well. If everything you did was good, then everything you felt and experienced would also be good. But life has different ways of doing things and will sometimes be dealt a bad card, as we label it. It's not bad, it simply is. Things are good and bad because those are our perspectives. However, why do bad things happen is what all of us tend to ask at one point or another in our lives. And it's because we're subject to our own wrongdoing, our own mistakes, limitations, insecurities. When we are capable of seeing that that is also part of us, that is when we can rest in the reality that things not being perfect is exactly as things should be because it's how they are. The actions you take have absolutely no connection with your worth and value. The actions you take have no connection with your worth and value. If there is a divide between who you are and who you want to be, and you have shame for that, then there's no way at the moment to bridge it. You just don't see how. Not accepting the divide between who you are and who you want to be is what creates further division between the two. Not accepting this divide means you have to continue to act like it doesn't exist, like you are half of a whole, like you don't also have faults and limits and pride. When you're trying to only show the good part of your face that wants to help people and would never hurt them, then you're never accepting the fact that sometimes you do hurt them. We must acknowledge that although our intention is good, sometimes it creates an impact that is not good for us and our needs. Wholeness is relatable. Canceling out your wholeness makes you less relatable and only isolates yourself. You can only be truly happy when you accept your insecurities, your fallibilities, your other half, your shadow, as a lot of people call it. And when it comes to love, we tend to say this, it pertains to you too. If you cannot accept yourself at your worst, you do not deserve yourself at your best. And you feel this every single day that you do something and then deny that shadow aspect. You think, I don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to feel joy. It's because you're not accepting yourself at your worst. When you are at your lowest, do you ask for help? Can you admit to yourself that you are lonely? And then do you have the bravery and the courage to change? The biggest thing I've done is name it to tame it. You can only rid yourself of shame when you own it. I had such bad imposter syndrome at the time of this fighting with the climate crisis. I was so afraid that others might see that I am not capable, that others might see my weaknesses and point them out and pull me apart. But nobody can do that to me now. Nobody can do that to me now because I know myself better than somebody else can. I got to the point of being able to say, yes, and that is so much more feminine and so much more beautiful because you are owning the space that you live in. You are that ocean. You shouldn't dull yourself into a little puddle. Essentially, when I say yes, and I'm saying I'm okay with it. I'm not looking for your validation in order to be who I am. What part of you are you disowning? Are you shaming? Are you guilting? Pushing negative feelings away and low and slow vibrations away only creates more of them. It is more powerful and strong to admit vulnerability and weakness than it is to deny it. You can only feel true connection and stop feeling isolated when you can embrace that you are a full person with fault also and weakness and vulnerability. Because vulnerability is a strength, I'm going to share with you an example of me at my worst. I hope that you also feel strong enough to admit a vulnerability, a weakness, an insecurity, a limitation in the comments below so that I can encourage you and we can encourage each other to own it, name it to tame it, be freed of it today. Because noticing is the first step to liberation. When you admit that something is the way it is, you have the power to change it. My biggest weakness was pride. I'm okay to admit this now because I've really worked through it and I am so blessed to have the friendship that I do. 4 years ago, I almost lost my closest childhood friend because I blamed her for the problems that were going on in the world. She chose something that I did not agree with, and I believed that my morality was higher than hers. That's scary to admit out loud, but it's true. My pride blinded me. My ignorance created a division between us, and I thought that I was all for unity, I was all for love, I was a good person, but I was doing a horrible thing that was impacting a lifelong friendship. I pulled away. I grew a wall between us. I let that division lead her to thinking all of these things about her own value and worth in our friendship. I genuinely believed I was part of the union and I was doing the right thing. I was actually causing the divide, and that is my fault. Her persistent love for our friendship is what led me to forgive. I was in the wrong, but she taught me how to keep loving. She taught me more about forgiveness than any book ever could. I began to learn from who I used to blame. The reason for the conflict was all my perception of the issue. That is a heart posture of humility, knowing that everyone and everything always has something to teach you, no matter who they are or where they come from. Who was I to think that my ideal standard of morality was also good and applicable for her? Who was I to judge her? Only God can do that. Why would I let our lifelong friendship be given up over a tiny bump in the road in the long run? I learned that we hurt those we love because those we don't love can't touch us. Those that we love are in our hearts, and if we love, we are also capable of being hurt by the very same people. Those who are in our heart do the most good and the most damage. And perhaps that's what you're afraid of if you think you're lonely. But in order to love, you have to let people in and you have to trust them. And that starts with trusting yourself, which again, that video, How to Be Confident, really goes through very well. What actually transformed and changed me was being able to detach and think of all these concepts without them meaning something about me. We are very quick in this culture, in this day and age, to consider identity. We are quite stuck on the idea that what things are is what we are, that we need to appropriate or belong to a certain label, and we don't. Belonging stems from lack. Belonging says, I need to be in your clique in order to be okay. That is where isolation exists. But actually being a part of something means that you're an individual who has their own interests. Are you too quick to identify with something rather than simply hold it and see how it feels and see what it could mean to you? Or do you attach meaning to something far too quickly? Detach. When we no longer identify or attach immediate meaning to something, we can see that there is so much more space. Leave room to talk about something, to conjecture, to give it words and vocabulary, discuss things without them meaning something about me or about you. It's not my identity. It's not taboo. It's not pushed under the rug. It's not labeled as bad, and therefore it can be talked about. It is the things that live in the shadow, like our failures, our weaknesses, our insecurities, the ideas of loneliness that really thrive in the shadow. They really thrive when we push them away and when we don't talk about them. This is why detaching is so essential and a big part of coming out of survival mode, because we're able to create so much more space in our environment. Of seeing it as a concept or a metaphor, we don't get offended. When we don't attach meaning to something, it liberates the concept. Knowing how to surrender is such an essential part of being a feminine woman. Not feeling isolated means that you feel connected to something. And for me, that is God. To be able to surrender, it means that you can let go of the reins and things will still go the way they need to. Because what you're resting in is the capacity to align. And I really encourage you to see how you can link up your intention with your intuition, your integrity, and your impact. Because when you have those in line, you can rest in the process, knowing you are doing the best you can, and what you do has nothing to do with your worth and your value, because that is inherent in your being alive, in the fact that you were given life by the Creator. My favorite definition of humility to this day is confidence properly placed in God. So if you want to look at confidence, I encourage you to see that last video. And properly placed in God means you trust Him. You trust Him so deeply that everything is going to work out. And that is what so many of us fallible humans tend to do. We tend to freak out, be stressed, and falter in our faith before it's meant to give fruit. Our intentions and our intuitions are only the seed of the plant that's going to come in its given season. So if we don't give it that time to germinate and the time to water it and the time to give it sun, how can we expect to receive that plant? A question I love is, how would you walk if all your prayers were answered? Life feels so much more easy when I know that I can be wrong sometimes. I know then that my successes have not everything to do with me, but also with God being by my side. Just like I know that my failures aren't because I didn't do something right, but because God wants something better for me. When you can zoom out to this degree, you realize that everything is happening in your favor. So you want to do the opposite of what these feelings expect. How wide can you open to embrace these feelings and acknowledge that it's not that you are shameful, it's that you have shame. It's not that you are wrong, it's that you can be wrong. Thinking that you don't have shame and that you can't be wrong only leads to pride and to an identity of, I'm better than you, or at least I'm not like that. And finding even more evidence for, well, I'm not imperfect like they are. As the Bible says in Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We can see the alignment of a prideful spirit and what that leads to, what impact that creates. So, some actionable steps you can take to be less lonely today is to truly detach from those beliefs that things are the exact way that you see them and start to ask why and if it's true. Pray to see the truth. Ask with deep intention to see what you need to do to change in order to act from a place of reality and not fantasy. Fantasy will always be how we see things versus how they are. So, as I always do, I pray for humility and I pray to see things as they are, not as I see them. I would rather act from a place of reality now than have to pay the price of acting on fantasy later. I would also dare you to go to an event or join a club that is part of your interests. See how you can also make friends as an adult. We perpetuate that it is a very hard thing to do in our culture, but I don't think it is. You just have to really delve into your own interests. Go into it without expectations, because if your expectations are low, you will always exceed them. Don't think that a friend has to be a certain way in order for them to be very close to you. I have learned so much from one of my friends who is a brilliant networker because she just laughs all the time and asks fun questions. So if you do try to join a club or something online, let me know in the comments below, and if that worked for you, I would love to hear about it. To humble oneself really is to know that you aren't entirely in control. It's to have an open heart and to see things as they are, not as you want them to be. Only God can be entirely in control, and that level of surrender gives way to so much more femininity and enjoyment in life, rising to higher vibrations and frequencies of emotion and a lot more happiness. In this state of heart, of humility, one can ask for guidance and receive a deeper and truer intuition more and more often. That is all that I can ask of this life. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends. Subscribe to my newsletter below where I'm talking soon about the upcoming course, Goodbye Good Girl. And if you're ready to talk one-to-one and become that woman of virtue that you've always known you can be, the type form is below. I only ask you to pay if you find value in our hour together. Otherwise, it's free. As my grandma always said, harden not your heart. Love and serve each other.